Hey everyone, welcome back to Houseplants Gone Wild. My name is Kelly. Today I wanted to do a quick video on soil mixtures. I had a few plants that I put in sort of a generic soil mixture earlier this summer, and they didn't seem to really like it. It was holding on to moisture for a little bit too long. Works for a lot of plants, but some of the more aroid type plants like Philodendron and Monstera, they do like a little bit more of the draining and airy sort of mixture. So I'll be showing you two plants that I'll be repotting and giving fresh soil today, as well as what I add to it. So hope you enjoy. If you have any questions, feel free to comment down below, or you can visit me at Instagram, houseplantsgonewild, or houseplantsgonewild.com. So to start the video off, I'll be doing two plants. First one is a Monstera Constellation. This one I got last year, I think. I had it in a generic soil mixture. It did need to be repotted. It was in a pot about this size, but it quickly became very root bound and stunted its growth. So I wanted to give it a bigger pot. As you can see, this one is quite a bit bigger, but I was running short of terracotta, and I do prefer this porous material for a lot of the aroids because it wicks away excess moisture. But as you can see, it did get a little bit of browning from a little high light that it was getting, but more so because it was getting overwatered. With plants that are highly variegated, they can be a little bit more hard to see if they're getting yellow, because the whites will oftentimes turn yellow and then brown super quickly. So a lot of times you get to miss that yellowing phase. This one here, this leaf, you can see just on the edge, there's a little bit of yellowing happening, as well as when you look at the undersides of the leaves. They have a little bit more of a yellow tinge to it, and that's what I noticed. It put out a brand new leaf, this one here, and it hasn't quite hardened yet. It's still very soft, but it's already started to yellow, which, as you may know, these plants are a little bit harder to find. So I wanted to make sure that I'm giving it fresh soil, something that works really well for these plants. I did check the roots, I rinsed them off really good, got all the old soil off that I could, and decided I'm just going to give it a nice, proper, really well draining mixture today. And then the other plant that I got is one of two plants that have been on my wish list for a very long time, and that's this little one. This is a Phylodendron Gloriosum, and the other plant that's on my wish list is a Pastizanum. So that one's yet to come, but this one for now, I just picked it up, found it on Facebook Marketplace, and I haven't even taken it out of the bag yet, so let's take a quick peek here. They had it in sphagnum moss, I can see here, just to hold on to that moisture. Sphagnum moss, and I can see there's some perlite. It's quite a damp mixture. But this is, so for Gloriosum, they actually lay down and they sort of creep along what would be a forest floor or your pot, and they'll put new growth out of the top. And yeah, the roots look good. Some of these, like sphagnum moss, this isn't a root, this is part of the moss. So let's take some of this off here, and I can have a better look of what the roots actually look like. Some of the materials that I bought today for this video were cocoa coir. I buy it in just like a dehydrated bale, and it's quite readily available, fairly inexpensive. I also have orchid bark and perlite. Both of those give the soil some good structure and allow for really good drainage. I prefer to use cocoa coir over sphagnum moss. I find it's a little bit easier for keeping. Like I said, it usually comes in a dried bale sort of material. It looks like this, fairly thin. This is actually 2 bricks compressed together side by side. So I've already taken 2 bricks and soak them in water, mix them around, fluff them up a little bit, and I'll show you what those look like here shortly. Now when you buy a plant and say it has like sphagnum moss on the roots for this plant, they can be quite delicate, so honestly I could leave some of the sphagnum moss. It wouldn't hurt because it is going to be going into a very well draining mix. Nice big beautiful velvety leaves with the striking veins that run through the leaves. The pastizanum is very similar, very large leaves. The only difference that I've really noticed with them in appearance wise is they can usually be a little bit of a darker green and they'll be glossy instead of velvety. So let's get that out of the way. So what I'm adding to the soil, first thing will be orchid bark. This big bag I think was like $6, $8 maybe. And all it is just some loose, I believe this is cedar. Yeah, a lot of times they use cedar wood chips. It smells quite nice and fresh. And then of course, perlite. This one you'll find in a lot of like your generic soil mixtures. Puffed volcanic glass, I think is what it's made out of. Also fairly inexpensive and readily available. And these are just little light fluffy stones that add a little bit more drainage to the mix. And then those two compressed bales of coco coir, they made this whole tub of coco coir. So yeah, this coco coir, it's quite soft, really good for both retaining moisture and doesn't hold on to it for too terribly long. It can wick out pretty quickly, especially in terracotta. So that's one bonus with using this with aeroids. Now for feeding the plants and giving them some nutrients, coco coir may have like the very slightest amount of nutrients, but really nothing to it. Same with the orchid bark and the perlite, no nutrients in it. So I make sure I add worm castings, just worm poop. Bought this bag today and it's just some dark soil. You just mix it in fairly evenly, as even as you can, and that gives it the nutrients that the plants need. When I do repot plants and I give them nutrient enriched soil, I find that you probably don't need to or shouldn't fertilize them for the first 2-3 times. We are still in the growing season, so I'll probably hold off until closer to September before I give it any sort of fertilizer, just around the end of the growing season. If plants are still growing throughout the winter, I do cut back my fertilizing, but I still give them some food because they are requiring those nutrients as they grow. So to start off, I'll just throw in my perlite and my orchid bark and my worm castings just to show you the ratios of those two. So we'll start with perlite. This can be quite dusty, so sometimes it's nice if you can have good air ventilation or have a mask on. That's about, yeah, it gets a little dusty. So that's about 1.5 cups of the perlite there. Oops. And now the orchid bark, I'll do about the same. So roughly 1.5 cups between those two. And I'll throw in a scoop of the worm castings, just a nice heavy scoop. And give that a good mix. So you can see it's mostly there at the bottom, not really up top. So that's fine. What I'll do is I'll make sort of a hole in the middle and just start adding my coco coir. That's about 1 cup, 2 cups, and every once in a while you'll find one of these clumps that didn't break apart, so you can just swish it. As long as you have moisture, it should be fine. It'll break apart fairly easily. So we'll start with that for now. Can always add more. I find it's nicer adding less coco coir at first and then adding more to it if needed, rather than using the perlite, orchid bark, and worm castings to add afterwards to try and make that mixture a little bit more well draining. So let's see how this looks after. And you can use this mixture for quite a few plants, depending on how their watering requirements. I wouldn't recommend this for, say, cacti and succulents. They prefer much more sandy, fast draining soil. This will be a little bit too much on the airy and fluffy side and wick away a fair amount of water, but the coco coir just helps to maintain and suspend moisture within the soil, but still allows air to reach the roots. So see, I can tell I might have even added a little bit too much coco coir to this mixture already. So I'll have to add some more perlite and orchid bark. So that's a nice mixture. It's when you squish it, it doesn't feel spongy because the orchid bark and the perlite, they act as sort of a little bit more structure to the soil mixture. So like it's quite evenly mixed. I'd say we probably have half orchid, or probably a third for each of the three of them, and then just a scoop of your nutrients. So for this, what I like to do, we'll start with the Phylodendron Gloriosum. So yeah, these are the roots that I'm working with right now. I can feel this right here. This is the stem that it was cut from. It's quite spongy. So for that tells me on the inside, like this, I can feel it's almost hollow. And I did just get this plant today off of Facebook Marketplace. I can see the roots. You want to make sure that they're nice and healthy, no root rot. Some of these roots look pretty dark. They're stiff, they're not mushy, these main ones here, which is good. Usually if roots, they're mushy and they can sometimes go like a really dark brown or even black, that can be an indication of root rot. So you want to make sure that before you put your plant in a soil mixture, those roots are really thoroughly cleaned, or you can even cut them off a little bit. It will stress the plant out, but I sometimes prefer that because it just reduces the risk of infecting or killing the plant off. So for this one here, I can quite easily squish that, and I can feel it sounds hollow. So maybe what I'll do is, let's cut this off, because I don't think this is going to benefit the plant in any way. It has no roots attached to it. All of the roots are attached to this main stem here, and that's the part that's going to sit just on top of the soil surface as it crawls along and puts out new leaves as it grows. So this part here, I want to make sure we have a clean cutting utensil or a knife or scissors. So let's grab a knife here. And you can cut it off and you could let it callus for a little bit. I'm just gonna cut it off and see what we got. Once I cut it, I'll show you what it looks like. So that's now what it looks like with its roots. And then this is that stem. And like I can just like squish it like this, like it's just mush. And it's like almost looks like a pumpkin that's been sitting out for far too long. Kind of glad I noticed that before I stuck it in soil. Even smells musty and not like a healthy root. Sometimes healthy roots, they'll have like a fresh soil or dirt smell. And I'll pull off all these ends of this mush, and I'll show you exactly the piece that I cut it from. And you can see just how much was left in there that was somewhat healthy. So that's where I cut it. A little piece there that's sort of a pale color, that's a healthy root. It's firm, I can feel it, whereas like this is just mush. So we'll take that and we'll get rid of it. So, moving on. I thought this terracotta, it would be a good place to start. It's not super small, but putting this plant in here, it gives it some good depth for roots, as well as I can push the plant to the back here and let it slowly grow in the direction along the soil. It'll grow this way because back here is where the roots and the new growth is coming out of this end. So let's start with putting just a little bit of mixture at the bottom. Nice and light, making sure it's well mixed as you're pouring it in. And if I start feeling that I'm putting some soil in and it feels like the mixture's changed a little bit, like maybe, oh, I've grabbed a part that's got a lot of, feels like heavy in cocoa coir or orchid bark, I can adjust. I can mix this bowl up a little bit, or I can add some different ratios to make it a little bit more of an even 1/3 cocoa coir, 1/3 orchid bark, and 1/3 perlite. So what I like to do is I like to put the plant quite deep down in the pot with the roots, evenly making sure that it's getting soil all around it. Give it a little bit of a tap down, and you can see it's quite low in the pot. And what I'll do is I'll just slowly lift it up and just shake it a little bit, so that way I've put the roots down here, and then I can slowly pull up and the plant will sit up here, but those roots will remain further down. So that way they don't all sit at the soil surface, they actually are further down in the pot. I don't fill it up right to the flush with the rim of the pot. I like to give it usually a 1/2 inch or so. So that way it's, over time, it's not gonna pour over the sides if I'm watering and I accidentally spill a little bit too much too quickly. And not pushing down too hard, but that should probably do. And you can see just on the top there, that's where that main root is that it's going to start to branch out from. And it'll slowly crawl along the soil surface, and that should do it. So the next one will be the Monstera Constellation. So for this, I'm going to do a little bit more of my mixture here. Now this mixture in terracotta, it will wick away excess moisture really well, but a lot of these plants that grow, they start on the forest floor where the soil is higher in moisture, lower light, but they're going to start reaching for that light, and they'll find usually a tree. Well, for Monstera, they'll find a tree, they'll hit it, and they'll start climbing up against it. And those aerial roots will start attaching themselves to the tree so it can structure itself and start climbing. Let's see, that's good. Let's add some more worm castings. Monsteras can be fairly heavy feeders depending on where you live or the growing habits and growing season. So because of it's a fairly active growing plant here in our home, it's put out quite a bit of new growth. I want to make sure that it's got the nutrients it needs. And then when I water it, that water will help push some of the nutrients from the worm castings into the absorbing cocoa coir. So for this Monstera, I went through the roots. You can see some of them, they still have a little bit of that old soil on it. I can't remember what kind it was, but nothing against buying a generic soil from a big box store and using that. I just found for these plants here with work and everything and my watering habits, I was trying to water roughly once a week. Keep that soil sort of consistently moist, but not overly damp or soggy, and that soil, even after 2 weeks, it was still quite wet. And it sort of started suffocating the roots, and even roots need air. So what I'll do is the same thing, put the roots down in, make sure they're not breaking, put them way, way down there, and start piling in the mixture. And I'll plant this one so that it's more upright. Could be leaning down, but I'm gonna plant it this way. You could give it a moss pull when you're repotting, so that way the moss pull sits all the way down to the bottom of the pot, and a little bit more structured in the pot for when the plant gets bigger. I have a Monstera, regular Monstera Gloriosa, that's putting out constant new growth and leaves that are like 16, 18 inches in diameter, lots of fenestrations, and it's got a moss pull, but I had to make sure that that moss pull is all the way down to the bottom because it's starting to get very big, very heavy, and when it leans towards the window, which, you know, you gotta rotate your plants every once in a while so they don't lean too much unless you're wanting that to happen, that moss pull has to be well structured. So once again, I put the roots down at the bottom here, put soil, and then now I'm just gonna lightly kind of shake it a little bit, get that mixture in that root ball, in those sort of empty gaps that are in the roots. And I can see when I grab it, I just lightly shake. I'm not pulling it up or pushing down, I'm just lightly kind of shaking it. And I can see the soil slowly sink in to all those little cracks and holes and crevices that are in between each of the roots. So now I'll add some more here. So hopefully that'll help with watering, keeping those roots from getting root rot, getting a little bit of air and oxygen down deep into that root ball and that soil so they're not suffocating. I know for this one, like I said, for that root ball size, it is a bigger pot. I did just repot it in this one this year. It was in a terracotta pot about this size. And so now I'm hoping that it has that room to grow, the roots a little bit more, they can expand, and it did put out this new leaf already inside this pot, but just with the watering habits, got to kind of match those. So working full time, it does definitely take an impact on the plants. Can't spend every day looking after them, caring for them. But if you notice anything with your plants that, like I said, with these variegated leaves, if they're browning really quickly and there's multiple of them, and you can always look at the undersides of the leaves, I can see like there's sort of looks like a rust color growing on them. You definitely want to be mindful, or have you been overwatering it? Is the pot, when you pick it up, is it always heavy? Does it feel waterlogged like my previous soil mixture was? I just stuck it in that mixture just because it's one I had on hand, and I thought, oh well, why not give it a try? Works for so many other plants. It might work for Monstera as well, and aeroids, but I wanted to be sure because I got one of my wish list plants today, that I wanted to be sure that I was getting a proper mixture for this one. May as well do them both. So that's it for this episode of Houseplants Gone Wild. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. You can email me or check out my website, houseplantsgonewild.com. I'm more active on Instagram, houseplantsgonewild, so you can message me there. I'll be uploading photos and I'll be updating how this Gloriosum grows. So thanks again, and my name's Kelly, and this is Houseplants Gone Wild.